So, hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Robinson, and I'm the Education Program Manager for the Savannah Institute, and I'll be coordinating this spring's Nutshell Shoot. And so it's really exciting, and just to kind of briefly describe what the Savannah Institute is for people who are new, the Savannah Institute is a nonprofit organization that works in collaboration with farmers and scientists to develop perennial food and fodder crops with diverse, multifunctional systems grounded in ecology and inspired by the Savannah Biome. I'm super excited and pleased to introduce Terry Durham. He worked closely with the Savannah Institute and actually just collaborated with us to release the River Hills Harvest Pioneer Agroforestry Farm Tour video. It's really beautiful. If you guys want to check it out, it's on the Facebook page and website. And then a little bit more about Terry. So Terry has been educating farmers, researchers, and consumers around elderberry since 1997. He has an elderberry nursery, manufactures the processing equipment, aggregation of berries, and production of elderberry products. So come and join us to learn the past, present, and future of elderberry with Terry.
Thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk about elderberries. You know, I love elderberries. I've been working for a couple decades now to educate people, develop systems to grow the elderberries. And I love Sambucus. So we're going to talk today about Sambucus canadensis mostly, but Sambucus as a family, it grows on every continent in the world except Antarctica. And there are different types of Sambucus that have been used by man on every continent for all different kinds of things, for medicine, food, tools, and entertainment. But today we're just going to talk mostly about canadensis elderberry. Going forward here, okay, elderberry. Canadensis is the Native American elderberry that grows on the east side of the Rocky Mountains, and it will grow in every state here in the country. And it's seen a lot with those white flowers there. That's what people notice about it along the road. It's a beautiful plant. It's native to almost all the states east of the Rockies now, and west of it they're beginning to plant the new plantations there, starting to go in, where they have other kinds. It's got a compound leaf. You can see the picture of a leaf there, and has about 7 to 9 leaflets on each leaflet. And on the stem, there are the little bumps on the stem that help with identifying it, little leeches there. They're almost like little roots that absorb water. The medium to large shrub. And elderberry's been used for a really long time for medicine. One of the early practitioners of elderberry was Hippocrates, and he was the one that gave it the name the medicine chest of the people. And he wrote an entire book on elderberry. He believed he could heal any part of the body with a part of the elder plant. He used all the different parts. He used the flowers, the berries, the bark, the leaves, the root, even used the fungus that grew on the outside of it. Lots of history on elderberry in Europe and other countries. Here in America, the Native Americans used elderberry for lots of different things. They would use the stems to make flutes, and tubes to blow on fires, and little tubes to get maple syrup out of the trees. They would dry the berries to make medicines and make it into pemmican and stuff. So they used the elderberries. It was very easy to dry and to move it around. And the American elderberry has lots of uses, and historical and things have been indicated for. The main ones is the antiviral aspects of elderberry. You know, it really does a good job of protecting us from the flu. Taking that one little bit of elderberry every day will pretty much keep you healthy, and does many different things. The university's been working on different projects with Alzheimer's, where they've reversed cognitive degeneration in Alzheimer's patients. They're working on stroke recovery, where you have much better recovery from oxidative stress of strokes when you're doing elderberry every day. They're working on prostate cancer, where they have cured mice of prostate cancer using elderberry juice. And there's lots of work going on in the medicinal world with elderberry. So one of the reasons that elderberry works so well as a medicinal is the high antioxidants that it has in it. And the ORAC is a measurement that people do to measure how much antioxidants in a product. And so here's a little graph you can see here of the different things, how much total ORAC units they have in them. Blackberry at 5,300, blueberry 6,500. Both have some really good antioxidants, but they don't really have as much as the elderberry at 14,000. The ones that come close are like chokeberry, which has 16,000, but it's not a very palatable thing. I don't know if you've had aronia. It's pretty astringent, and it's pretty hard to get into different kinds of foods and things. Cranberry has a good number at 95, 84, but you can see how elderberry is jam-packed with them. And most of the ones that are in there are the water-soluble types of antioxidants too. So it's filled with good juice properties. So there's lots of different things that people make with elderberry. You know, it is a processing crop. You can't eat those fresh berries. They're delicious. We like to make them into different kinds of pies, and you can put them in muffins and different things when they're fresh. They're delicious that way. In the past, we've always had a little fear that there was a precursor of cyanide in those fresh berries and that they need to be processed. But we have just found out after 5 years of research that the American elder does not contain those precursors of cyanide that the European type elderberry has. So it's a big advantage to the American elderberry growers that we don't have to worry so much about that cyanide being in there. So the culinary uses can go up, so we can promote those to be eaten fresh without having to worry about that. Then they can be dried. There's lots of dried berries. The co-op with the elderberries up north, the Midwest Co-op, has been drying elderberries for a while. And they sell really well. There's a huge demand for the dried elderberries. They use them in fruit mixes. People make syrups with them and other kinds of medicinals. You can also freeze-dry those berries, which is something we started doing, and that's a really good product, the freeze-dried elderberries. We've mostly been working with the juice. In Europe, the juice got started as a natural food coloring, and there was a lot of work done to use it as a food coloring because they weren't allowed to use imitation food colorings. They had to use natural food colorings in the European Union countries. So it gave those growers a good start to do the colors for the different products. It's still a big industry. A lot of what's imported to the United States from Europe is a concentrate that's really used for food coloring. Also, they use the medicinals. They use the concentrate, which does come from Europe, and extracts, tinctures, and syrups. Those are all different ways that you can preserve the elderberry with sugar or alcohol or glycerin, and they make some good medicines with all of those things. Jams and jellies are popular. Jams have been a traditional thing to make with elderberries for a long time. Vinegars are very easy to make with vinegar. You can put the elderberries directly in some vinegar and make it that way, like a tincture, or you can go ahead and make the elderberries directly into vinegar with a good mother, and that works great. Makes great elderberry wine or vinegar that way. Wines, meads, and spirits have all gotten more popular. There's quite a few wineries now that are starting to make elderberry wine. Meads traditionally have been made with elderberry, and now some of the spirits are being flavored and colored with elderberry. Enhanced waters, juice blends, there's all kinds of great things to do with the juice. And the blossoms, another whole crop that you can get off of the elderberry, has gotten to be more popular in Europe. About half of the production goes to elderflowers, which is a lot. There's a lot of elderflower cordial made in Europe, and they dry the flowers for tea. So then also you can use those teas for the blossoms for teas. We've been freezing the fresh picked blossoms and starting to use those in different products. That's a better quality of elderflower to use as the frozen. then it's also good for wildlife habitat. Elderberry is loved by the birds also. All the birds do like to eat them. It can be kind of a problem sometimes, but they like good things to eat. It's really nice to put them in for wildlife habitats. And we know how well they do with holding the soil with that root system that spreads out all over and holds things in place, so they're great in the riparian areas. There's also horticultural types of elderberries, though the American elderberry has not been developed very much as a landscape plant. There are a few. This is a gold leaf elderberry that's in a nursery or in a garden in Kansas City. But there's a lot of work that could be done with that. There are a lot of beautiful different types of elderberries. Back in 1997, is when the elderberry improvement program started out here in Missouri. And before that time, this was the cultivars that were around, that were known, that people had used. The Adams 1, Adams 2. We don't know that anyone has Adams 1. They haven't been able to find it. They've all been Adams 2 when they were testing. We hope we can find a real Adams 1 sometime and find it. Easy Op has been lost. We can't find any of that anymore. York is still available. It's a nice big berry. We have not grown it very much, but some of the growers are pretty happy with it. We plan on trying to start some this next year. Then there were those were all early introductions from, you know, the 20s, 30s, New York in the 60s. Then there were the Canadian cultivars, and since Canada was a European Union country, they couldn't use artificial colors, so they started working on using elderberry for dye plants and for colors. They used to use elderberry juice as a stamp for meat carcasses. There would be the blue stamp on, and they would make out of elderberry juice. So they developed a dye industry up there, and these are the ones that they mostly had selected for their dye industry: the Johns, Nova Scotia, Kent, and Victoria. And that was in the 50s and 60s when they were introduced. Then there are European elder cultivars, which can grow in the United States. They don't grow very well here in the Midwest. They usually die. But some other parts of the country, they do grow. But we have to grow them differently than we grow the American elderberry. So from that, in 1997, what happened was they made a call to farmers to collect all the best elderberries they could find in the Midwest. And they had a number of growers that sent their best elderberries in. They had maybe 67 ones in the original project that started. And from that, they selected the best 10 that they put into replicated trials. And it goes on until the first one that came out of that project then was the Wildwood Elderberry. And it does come from Oklahoma, so it comes from a pretty hot, dry area down there around Eufaula Lake. And it was given to the project by Marge Milliken. She's like the grandmother of the elderberry world. She's been doing stuff in it for a long time. The wildwood is a nice tall plant. It grows about the same height as an Adams, very similar to the Adams. It's got nice big flowers, and one of the reasons it was selected, it was that it had a tendency to set 3 flower heads after it made its first primocane set. So it had the potential to be very productive, to produce a lot of flowers. Wildwood is what we consider an indeterminate elderberry. Elderberries, like tomatoes, there are determinate elderberries and indeterminate elderberries. And this is what the growers have figured out that are growing fields, and it works really good with the timing. Once we started growing fields of them, we were able to see the different selections had different timing where they would come on. And some, like tomatoes, were very determinate and would produce all their flowers at one time, and their fruit would come on pretty consistently, and they didn't regrow and make more flowers. And then some, like the wildwood we were talking about here, it was very indeterminate, and it would set that first clump of flowers, and it would grow some more and send out another clump of flowers and get those set. And they would do that about 3 or 4 times in progression. So there's advantages and disadvantages to the indeterminates and the determinants. The indeterminates will give you lots of nice flowers, and you can pick some of those flowers and then also get fruit. If you pick the flowers off of the determinate types, they won't rebloom, so you won't get anything after that. So the indeterminates are really good for flower production in particular. And so they have nice big heads. The Wildwood, you can see, has, here's some of the chemistry. It's got a nice pH of 4.4, so it's pretty acidic, so it's a good one for processing. It's got great different acidity and that makes some pretty good wine. They've been working with that. And so it does have a little bit more problems with leaf spots, and it does have some problem with mites, but the way we take care of them by total coppicing gets rid of those mites. So doing that with management, so that's works out pretty good. So the thing about the Wildwood, the average size head, we'll talk about that. I think it runs around a 60-gram size head when it has been coppiced to the ground and we're growing them as a primocane. So one of the other things that they learned in the early research, we didn't know really how to prune the elderberries, the American elderberry. All the stuff was on European elder, and it was growing differently. And so we knew that along the side of the road, some of the best elderberries grew and had great big heads, but they got cut down every year. So there was a 5-year pruning study that showed how the different pruning methods would work, from regular pruning of the old cuttings and the old wood and damaged stuff, traditional type pruning. Then they pruned some all to the ground every year. They pruned some all to the ground every other year. And then they didn't prune some at all. And when it came down to the whole thing, you could do the total annual pruning, which is much simpler than trying to prune just the dead wood out. You can just run over it with a bush hog or a sickle mower and cut them all down, and that they would grow back up and synchronize the blooming and the fruiting, so we wouldn't have to pick them as many times, because we want to synchronize that so we can get in and out of the fields quick. So that pruning study showed that we only lost a little bit of our total overall yield if we did it that way. And as a farmer, it's much easier to mow those plants, have them all synchronized, kind of the same height. And when they're at the same height, then you have an even ripening all the way around, as well as, so we can pick those about 2 times. The Wildwood is it grows really well like that, but then it will come up and we have to pick it several times. Even with the synchronization, we still have to pick it more times than the determinants. So Bob Gordon was the second one that was released from that program, and it is kind of just the opposite of the Wildwood, and it's very determinate. It's a very determinate plant, and it grows up. It has really nice big heads on it. The heads on these Bob Gordons will average almost a 1/4 pound each, and it's a pretty good size. I've seen them up to almost 2 pounds on really giant heads before. But that's on the pruned plants. The unpruned plants will average about half that size, 67.5 grams. If you see that middle picture there, the one on the right of the Bob Gordon name, you can see how that's turned way upside down. We call that recumbent positioning, and that's really nice that the Bob Gordon does that. We like varieties that do that because the birds have a hard time eating the berries off of that. When they're upside down like that, it's much harder for them to pick the berries off. A lot of the times the elderberries are more like an umbrella where they're all spread out, and it's like a easy landing platform for the little birds to eat. So it gives you a little bit of bird control with that shape. Bob Gordon also is very sweet. It's probably one of the highest brix elderberries that we grow, and it's nice and purple and has a really good taste. And the winemakers like it because it has the best characteristics for making wine. But it doesn't have as low a pH, so we have to work with it a little bit more when we process it to get the acidity down. It's pretty good with mites, too. It doesn't have much problem. The other real good determinant that we've been working with, and I really love this plant, it's called the ranch elderberry. It's the very first one to bloom. And so it comes on early, makes a really nice crop of dark fruit, and then it's done because it's a real determinant type plant. And right after it finishes, then that Bob Gordon will start. So these two determinants that we're talking about follow each other really easily. And so you can put your ranch in, you'll have it about picked, and then we can move right over into the Bob Gordon. The ranch is a little more heat resistant, and we put it, it likes a little more clay in the soils. It's not quite as demanding as some of the other ones. We still love the Adams 2 elderberry also. It's the old heirloom that we still grow. It does have a little bit more problem with a few green ones in their heads, but with our processing, we're able to take those out. And they don't produce quite as much juice as the other ones. In our trials, it usually runs about 10% less juice per pound of berries. But it does make a lot of berries, and it's still a really vigorous grower. And it's a very indeterminate plant, so it's another of the really good indeterminates. And those are the four main types of elderberries that we grow. Now, elderberries do have a few insect problems, but not too bad. You can see here's the erythroid mite. The elderberry mite was very unresearched, and actually they've named 2 new mites from the research they've been doing on the elderberry at the university now. And there are many different kinds. Like that plant there with those curl leaves, the entomologist told me that probably had 40,000 mites on it to make it look like that. And it can be a problem. Now, you can spray this if you're not pruning your plants all the way to the ground. You can use a dormant oil spray as a precaution that you'll put on in the late winter. You want to use it closer to the time when the buds are beginning to just loosen up a little bit, because it gets better penetration in there to kill them. Though it's much easier if you do the annual total pruning. You get rid of those mites because they overwinter in the buds on the plant. So it works really good when you're doing that total coppicing to keep the mites out. Then the bacterial leaf spot can be a problem, but it's in the more humid areas, it can be more of a problem. We're still working with it a little bit. I've had good luck with just using like a copper as a fungicide to kind of keep that down. And we have in Missouri, we have Japanese beetles, which can cause a lot of problems in elderberries. Luckily, they are just finishing up when the berries are coming on, so they're really not in the berry crop, but they do get on the leaves and defoliate those. We've worked with several different growers or researchers on the Japanese beetles, and we've done quite a bit of mass trapping. If you have a little bitty orchard or a garden, you don't want to do mass trapping and draw them into your orchard. But when you have a big orchard and there are a lot of them in there, you can set the traps up on the edges of the field. We had worked with Lincoln University, and they have some information on it where they would use 55-gallon drums as the receptacles for the traps, and we would put in a floral scent and a pheromone, and they would come in and hit that trap and fall down into the barrel. And we could catch millions of them around our fields because they're everywhere. And that works, and what we would do to help make that work is called push-pull. where we would start in the very center of the orchard spraying Catalin clay, which is a product that you can buy. It's a good organic product. It's a thin clay. They call it Surround is the product name. And so we would start in the very middle of the field spraying this Surround and work our way out back and forth to push the insects out of the field. They really hate that thin clay on their exoskeleton, plugs everything up, and they'll fly away, and then they go up there and they smell those traps and go into the traps. And that really works to help keep the population down. We also think that we also are using some neem that we use in our fertigation system, and we drench our beds with neem to help with killing them out of the soil, and it also helps us with any of the spotted-winged Drosophila that have made it into the soil. It also helps control those in that little time when they're in the soil under the plants, so you can use that. So the spotted-winged Drosophila is the other one I wanted to talk a little bit about. There's lots of work on that. You can see all kinds of ways and chemicals to help control the spotted-winged Drosophila, because they can be a big problem in the elderberry and lots of different fruit crops. There are raspberries and strawberries. They're a problem also. So what we have been working with is trying to monitor, and we teach people in our workshops, and it's easy to find online, ways to make traps where you trap in. They mostly have been used for monitoring traps to tell when you have the problem, and then you can try to address it with some kind of insecticide. There are a few organic ones that work really good. They're just really expensive. So what we've been trying with some of the smaller growers, if you don't have a huge orchard, you can put about 50 little plastic traps. Red, they seem to be attracted to, and you can catch those insects in there, and you can do a pretty good job of controlling them. You want to put them in the middle of the plant, about 12 inches up from the ground, because they spend most of their time in the shade down low to the ground in the plant. And when you catch the very first ones, it helps control everything. And by keeping your fruit picked and not letting it stay out there or fall on the ground, that also really helps with the spotted wing. And there's lots of good information on that. So this is the view. This is what most people see elderberry. We're going to talk a little about the way that we produce elderberries in Missouri, and I'll try to talk a little bit about other ways also. We see a lot of these white-flowered plants along the sides of the roads. And when we first started, we were growing all of our cuttings in the greenhouse. And so we start and we make a special mix for our elderberry cuttings when we're doing them in the greenhouse. A long time ago, I read I think it was in Rodale, about that it was important to plant elderberries around your compost pile. And I've always wondered about that, and now we begin to learn how important it is to work on the mycorrhizals and the soil microbes, how important they are to everything. And I've been told now that an elderberry will give up 20% of its carbohydrates that it's making to feed the soil microorganisms, and in particular the mycorrhizals. And they have a very bulky root system, so they don't have a lot of fine roots, and they rely on the mycorrhizals to help them get all the micronutrients that they need out of the soil. So they feed those soil microbes, and they feed the mycelial, and then those plants in exchange return nutrients that they need. So they're real important to stimulating the microbes in the soil. So in the greenhouse, we wanted to try to make something like that. So we put three different things in our soil mix. In a 3 cubic foot bag of soil mix, which is a loose big bag generally, is about that. We put in 1 pound of azomite, 1 pound of charcoal or biochar. And those two products both are very, very porous. The azomite has got many, many different minerals and micronutrients in it. And the charcoal, and I even prefer biochar these days because I think it's even more stable, they act as like little apartments in the soil for the microorganisms to retreat into when there's stress in their environment. So we mix those in there, and then to inoculate that soil to give it some good mycorrhizals, we put in some really well-made compost, something that's got a lot of life in it. And that will inoculate that soil, and that way, right when the roots start coming out of the plants, they'll have those nutrients right in there. So you can see these cuttings that we make of the elderberries. You know, elderberries are really easy to propagate from the dormant hardwood cuttings, which are just pieces of the hardwood stem. It's an opposite budded plant, so you want to cut it in sections so that 2 buds are below ground and 2 buds are above ground, so that it can root from the bottom ones and then shoot up the nice green sprouts at the top. So it takes 8 to 10, 12 weeks to get them to a size where they have good roots to be able to plant them out. So this particular field was one of the earlier ones we were putting in. This was a soybean field. It had been in soybeans for like 50 years continuous, conventional beans. It's pretty much dead soil, but we were in such a hurry to get them planted. We were getting ahead and we worked it up, and we got some compost on there. And this is where we're just taking that bean field and disking it up. Then we tilled up our beds. We plant the elderberry rows about 12 feet apart. And then in row, we'll put those cuttings at 2 foot or plants at 4 foot. I made a little toolbar there on the back of my tiller so that we could lay out the rows evenly and they'd be spaced well between them. Then we like to put down flatbed black plastic with drip tape. It's kind of you got to take that plastic up. It's a little bit of a hassle, but I spent 25 years growing vegetables with this equipment organically, and so I had all that, so that's how I kind of developed this system. The flatbed plastic's much easier if you have the land that can you do that with, because you can mow over the edge of it easier once we establish the grass and stuff in there. So we would plant our plants or the cuttings, the hardwood cuttings, either one, with a big water wheel planter. So, like, these are all vegetable growing equipment. You can usually find them or buy them, or it's not too hard to plant them by hand either. You can see there's a nice plant ready to go on. See, you want good roots so you can pull them out. The elderberry is all about the root system, because they can grow. We'll cut them off and they'll grow, and really it's the roots that are the big part. So in the other half of that big soybean field, we were able to go ahead and plant our cover crop and get it growing. And then we came back in late summer here, and we strip tilled where we were going to put our beds. And we liked that. And then we went ahead and laid the plastic in those. And then we direct planted the cuttings with that same planter into the plastic. And these are not rooted. Now these we planted here in Missouri about the 15th of February, and this is about mid-March that this was taken during my mentoring workshop. You can see almost every plant, those sticks just stuck in the ground there in the winter, and they're all dormant. Now they're all starting to come up. One of the problems we have when we do them in the greenhouse is that they leaf out instantly when you put them in that warm greenhouse, and they don't have any roots. So they're really easy to kill if you forget to water them. Whereas if you put them out directly in the ground, they don't get their leaves on until it's time. And it's a little bit less expensive. You don't have to go through the process of the greenhouse work, though it's fun to grow them inside in the greenhouse, and we usually do that. This is a really nice front delivery mulch wagon. Puts on a lot of mulch. You can put a whole semi-load on a day really easy with one of these, and does a good job. This is a oak mulch. I've seen all kinds of mulch used on elderberries, from pecan shells to shredded newspaper, and they all seem to work. They all have advantages and disadvantages. I always think that mulch is good to change it around and use different things, different years. So then mostly what you get into the winter, you're just going to be, or in the summer, you're just mowing. We try to plant a mixture of grasses and legumes in between the rows of elderberries. We like 3 legumes and 3 grasses. We try to plant native grasses and legumes in those mixes. If you can keep that 50% legume in your orchard in there, it'll make a significant amount of nitrogen from you. Because the elderberries they're making their roots all the way across that mowed area. They're about 6 inches underneath the sod. And so every time we mow that grass, it shocks the root systems of the grass. It sloughs off a few little fine roots, which become good food for the microbes and things in the soil. And then the elderberry roots are growing right underneath the bottom of those grass roots, and they're there to absorb all that energy. They scavenge it from the whole area. A little picture of flowers setting, starting to get on there. And there's what rows of elderberries. That's from one of our nursery fields. We don't keep every weed out of the field. We need a little bit of other ecology in there, I think, to make everything happy. This is a nice elderberry. This is from a cutting. This is this June after we had planted it the year before, and in February or March probably. That's a Bob Gordon that we're looking at there. Had made about a pound of fruit on that one year, the second-year-old plant. Sometimes you can plant those cuttings and they'll grow really fast further south. Now, this gentleman's Bob McCord. He lives down by Hot Springs, Arkansas, and those plants behind him were cuttings he had planted in the early spring in March. And this is a picture in September. They had grown that tall and gotten fruit and heads, and he got a little bit of a harvest, about 700 pounds from his first year. So they can really grow when they have a long season. They get really good fertility and conditions. Here you can see the determinate ones out. All of them are getting ripe at the same time. It's getting ready for a nice harvest in there. Those are Bob Gordons. And on the right, you can see the indeterminate, the Wildwood. See how the center primocane berries, those set first, and then it sends out the 3 little shoots around it. Then those all bloom and start setting fruit, and I'm sure there's another flower above there just out of the picture. So it'll do that. It'll have those stages going for a while. So there's what you want a nice, big, ripe clump of elderberry to look like. Hold it upside down there. See how the berries are all dark. There's no green ones in there. You know, elderberries are like blackberries also. That first shiny one doesn't have the sugars really built up. You got to wait till they start getting a little bit dusky, a little bit ripe. You know, they're not as shiny, and it's built up a lot more sugar there, and then they're delicious. So we try to pick those elderberries when they're all nice and purple. So here's a few. This is a really good publication. If you go to our website, you can download this. This is the Nrcs Technical and Financial Assistance to Establish Elderberries. Every state has a little bit different look on how much they will pay for that, but I've seen some farmers get quite a bit of money from this program. I've seen one farmer get $60,000 to put 20 acres of elderberries in. Some states will pay for the plants, all the different parts of it, soil work. And so there are different places it will fit into. So I always suggest that if you download this, there's a woman's name on the back that wrote it. And she's still here in Missouri, and she loves elderberries. And if you call her at the state office there, she will call the person in your county and help explain how elderberry will fit into the NRCS equipped program for support. There's some fruit. So then we get to the destemming part. This is the elderberry destemmer that we have developed to destem the fresh elderberries so that we can sanitize and wash them. This is a farm scale implement that allows you to get those berries off and get that frozen so your crop is stable right there on the farm. This is one of our growers who has that all set up on a trailer. You can see the cooler there, and this is the destemmer on this side. There's a triple sink on the other side, and then a little workstation, and you can pull this right up to the field, and they'll pick the berries and bring them right up there, and they get destemmed and put in the freezer really quick that way. We like to get those berries in the freezer that same day. There you can see they're working on that, and then they're packing them up. We put 25 pounds of destemmed sanitized berries in each bucket and freeze it up. We have to put a code on there of where it came from, the growers, and all the different tracing facts so we can figure out from the store what grower produced the berries for that bottle of product. Here are some of the products that we make: the elderberry juice, cordials, syrups, jellies. There's so many different things. We have field tours, and we have coming up in June, the comprehensive elderberry workshop we do every year. It's a 3-day all elderberry workshop. People come from all over North America to learn about elderberries and to share their elderberry adventures. The researchers are there, and we have a lot of grower experiences, and it's right there in Jefferson City. So you can go to our website there, riverhillsharvest.com, and if you go to the Growers tab, and you'll get to go into the Growers section, and you can download a really good Growers manual and guide sheet there when you register for the newsletter. We also have a mentoring workshop in March the 15th. So I think we have a little bit of time for a few questions now.
All right, sweet. Thank you, Terry. That was super interesting and also really cool to see how fast they put on growth. That was crazy, just within a year. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into the Q&A mode, and then people can either message the questions or let me just switch the mode here. Okay, so we've got some questions so far. People feel free to message them in. So one question we got is any tips on harvesting? And where did you get your destemming machine?
So harvesting, we harvest by hand, cutting the entire big umbrals, and we put them in buckets, and then we take all of our buckets of berries back to the processing shed where we use that destemmer, the larger model. We make and sell those to growers. It's an important part of our co-op and the way we treat everybody, how to handle the elderberries. We do also make a hand destemming basket that you can see online if you go to our website that works for destemming the fresh berries. If you just have a few, though, if you take the whole heads and you put them into a sack, don't jam them in real tight, but leave them a little bit loose, and then you put them in the freezer. They'll freeze. After they're frozen, you can knock them around, and most of those berries will fall off. And if you have them like in a sack that you can sacrifice, you can cut the corner of that sack, and those berries will just fall right out. They'll all have just a little piece of stem on them, though. And it does have a little bit of off flavor, but that's traditionally the way people have done it for a long time.
All right, sweet, thank you. Okay, and the next question is, could you talk a little bit more about your coppicing regime for your elderberry?
Well, we have been working with that now since we first started the elderberries. We had that research had been done. We knew that that would work. So we have tried it a number of different ways. We have used sickle bars to cut the entire plants down. We've used bush hogs to bush cut them down. We hand prune them. But the quickest method, and what we use mostly, is a steel weed eater with a blade on the end, and we can go in there and give a pretty precise cut and use all those for new propagations. Because that's the nice thing about pruning your elderberry orchard. You have lots of new plants that you can make and expand your orchard as big as you want. Not every type of elderberry takes to the coppicing, though. Now, John's variety does not really like to be cut down well like that. And some of the others may not work as well because I have not grown all the different types of elderberries that are out there. We know that the ones that were in the research do have that ability to stool and come up really quick again, and the winter hardiness to go along with it. And so we like it. They grow out of the ground really fast. And the only thing you have to remember is to feed them, because they do like to eat a lot. We feed the plants 3 times a year. We'll start out early in the spring before they come up. In February or March, we'll put on, after we're done pruning and mulch, we'll put on dehydrated chicken manure, which works really good for some really quick nitrogen. And we'll put up to 80 pounds to the acre of nitrogen on in the season. Then we'll put on a blooming type fertilizer just before they bloom, and then a rooting for fertilizer with almost no nitrogen to put them to sleep with in the fall.
All right, great. And then the next question we have from Paul and Alana is, do you ever grow from seed? Because you've talked about the cutting. I'm curious about this.
They will grow from seed, but one of the advantages of using the cuttings is that you have a consistent cultivar that's going to ripen at the same time. When you grow from seed, it's a big genetic pool, and you get ones that are very, very different when you grow them from seed. And so they won't have the same, you won't be able to pick a whole block at one time the way that we are when we plant clones of individuals that we knew that were superior. Now, if you're going to try to select for some new types of elderberry, that's the way to go. But there's a lot of variance in ones grown from seed. And it takes a couple years longer from seed than it does from cuttings to get a big plant.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for doing this presentation, all your work. It's been really fun learning. I really appreciate it. And we were just, my wife and I, Mara, met you last year at Moses Conference and got really interested in our small market farm, trying to establish elderberries where we are. And we've been watching some of your videos on processing, and it appears that those that are involved in the Midwest Elderberry Co-op, that they're maybe GAP certified for the processing. And just wondering if you can elaborate, discuss like how small-scale farmers or growers can be in compliance with food safety regulations as far as selling direct to consumer.
Okay. Well, that's the thing. If you're selling direct to consumer, you don't really have to have a GAP certification or anything. The thing that we teach people and we want are them to be trained to the procedures, the GAP procedures. They just need GAP training instead of certification. And they are 2 different things. You can be GAP trained and have a good farm plan without going through the certification process. And that is, you don't really need the certification process unless your market is demanding it. We don't have any of our market that's demanding that we have that, though we train our growers to all follow it. And so that way it's an advantage without having to go to the cost for what we're doing. I don't believe that at the co-op they are actually GAP certified. They are just GAP trained, and they have a farm plan for it. And so that's kind of the stuff with the gap. We just want people to follow a certain procedure when they're washing the berries, because I don't know if you've seen in the videos where we do the triple washing in the stainless sink using the stainless steel colanders that we actually catch the berries in under the destemming machine. And that batch washing really makes it much easier. You don't have to pour them anything until you pour them in the bucket to freeze them. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Sounds like a good strategy.
I will be giving a presentation at Moses this year, so if you're there, come and see me.
Okay, and so these are really great questions, everyone. So the next question we got is, so there's one on if you sell cuttings to Canada, and if not, where do you recommend getting cuttings for the varieties you shared?
We do sell cuttings, but we are not selling them into Canada right now. There are a few really good nurseries that are selling them up there. I think Elderberry Grove is one that's over towards British Columbia, and there are a few people that are selling them up there. I think that the cuttings from the far north, if they come from plants from the far north, they're just a little better acclimated. When we have sent them up there, it seemed to have taken them just a little longer to adapt to the more northern climates. I know they grow well, though, in Ontario, and then over in British Columbia, both places we've got growers that are using them. Okay.
Okay, and then we seems like we have one more question so far, and this one is, let me just pull it up. Ooh, yeah, this is a good question. Do you have any thoughts? This is from Ben Bishop. Do you have any thoughts on interplanting elderberry or use of polycultures that still preserve ease of harvest of the elderberry?
Well, yes, people are using elderberries to interplant. I know that the elderberry growers that grow pecans, they have started planting elderberries in between their rows of new pecans. We have growers that have started or worked at planting vegetables in between their cuttings the first year to help pay for their investment. They would grow a cabbage every 4 feet, and an elderberry in between those, more or less, or elderberry every 4 feet with a cabbage or some other vegetable in between there, because it's right on plastic and it's pretty easy to grow that way. One of the things that I've been working on with the University of Missouri is something that we call linear farming, that I'm trying to get people to embrace a little bit more, because it's a way to have it's still a monoculture, but you're only doing it in a thin, long line. And we know from what the work that they're doing there, if we put berms at the bottom of the watersheds before it goes into the creeks and give that water a little time to settle, that we take a lot of the pollution out of it, the estrogen, the extra nitrates. They can be absorbed right there and not get stuck into the water. And so by farming elderberries and some other crops and long lines that follow the contours of the watershed, in this long linear farming that will go from one farm on to the next, is a pretty efficient way. It's hard to do gills and clumps of mixed crops efficiently for production. It takes a lot of labor to sort through the two different things. So that would be my thought on that. But it does grow well with black walnuts also.
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry, for your time.
So I want to thank you too, and remind people, encourage them to sign up for our newsletter. We don't send out a lot of stuff. It's usually educational about the places we're going to be. We travel around the country giving presentations, and I hope to meet all of you in person sometime.